Hi, my name is Grace Morgan, and I'm 28 years old. As I drove down the familiar road towards Cedarville, Wyoming, my hometown, my palms sweated against the steering wheel. It had been 5 years since I last saw this road, this house, or my family. And now I was returning, not as the rebellious daughter they thought I'd always be, but as something entirely different. Tucked away in my bag was a uniform they hadn't earned the right to see yet. The silver eagle insignia glinting under the cloth represented something they never believed I could achieve. Colonel. Not just a title, but one of the youngest in Army Cyber Command. And tomorrow, at Stratos Defense Solutions' annual leadership event, they would finally learn the truth. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel just like they used to. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. Same peeling paint, same wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. The porch light flickered even though it was mid-afternoon. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out. Each movement was practiced, calm, controlled, nothing like the girl who had left here feeling like a failure 5 years ago. Inside, the hallway greeted me with all its memories. Faded family photos still hung on the walls, including ones of my brother Mark's wedding and his corporate awards. None of mine, of course. The worn carpet under my feet hadn't changed either. It felt like stepping back into a time capsule sealed by emotional dust. I walked through the house slowly, letting my fingers brush over surfaces once familiar, but now sterile. "Grace, you made it," my mother's voice called from the kitchen. She didn't come to the door. She never did. Her voice was as crisp and cold as always, polite but edged with that ever-present disappointment that only surfaced when she spoke to me instead of my brother. I set my bag down quietly in the foyer and wandered toward the kitchen. The smell of roast and potatoes filled the air, comfort food that didn't quite comfort. My mother, Linda Morgan, stood at the counter stirring gravy like she hadn't missed a beat since I'd left. No hug, no welcome, just a glance over her shoulder. "Your brother will be here soon," she added. "Got another promotion. Senior project manager now." "That's great," I replied, trying to sound genuine. My words came out practiced, mechanical from years of emotional armor. She continued listing Mark's achievements like bullet points in a PowerPoint presentation, his wife Rachel's new job at a top law firm, their new house on the west side of town, their planned vacation to Hawaii. Not once did she ask how I had been, or what I'd been doing. I stood there for a few more minutes, nodding, before excusing myself to go upstairs. My old bedroom was just as I left it. Posters from high school cheerleading, ribbons from academic competitions, even the acceptance letter from the University of Colorado pinned to a corkboard like a relic. It was like they had frozen time just before I made the one choice they couldn't accept, joining ROTC and the military. There were no photos of my commissioning as a second lieutenant, no accolades for my deployments, no framed promotions. It was as if my entire adult life had been erased. I sat on my old bed, letting the familiarity calm my nerves. I remembered vividly the night I told my parents I had received an ROTC scholarship. My father, Frank Morgan, had stared at me like I told him I planned to rob a bank. "The military is for people without options, Grace," he said. "You're smarter than that." Even then, Mark had been on the fast track to follow in our father's footsteps at Stratos Defense. Groomed for success. Celebrated for it. While I was treated like someone who had thrown everything away. I stood up and opened my suitcase. Tucked inside was the garment bag holding my full dress uniform. The deep midnight blue fabric was pristine, every metal polished, every ribbon perfectly aligned. I ran my hand over the silver eagle stitched at the collar. Full colonel. At 28. It hadn't come easily. It had come through deployments, cyber operations, classified missions, and unrelenting dedication. Tomorrow, I would step into Stratos Defense's conference hall as the Pentagon's official liaison for Project Sentinel, a $1.2 billion contract developing advanced military-grade cybersecurity systems. I held final say over every technical decision, and neither my father nor my brother had any idea that the project Mark had just been assigned to lead was under my direct oversight. I hid the uniform deep in the closet behind some old jackets. One more dinner to survive, one more night of being the invisible daughter, the disappointment. Then everything would change. The doorbell rang downstairs. "That'll be Mark," my mother said as I made my way down the stairs. And just like that, it began the last night they would look at me and not see who I had become. The dining room felt more cramped than I remembered. Maybe it was the oversized personalities seated around the table, or maybe it was the fact that I no longer shrunk to fit into the space they allowed me. Mark arrived with Rachel, both dressed like they were coming from a business magazine photo shoot. She wore a beige silk blouse that probably cost more than my month's deployment stipend, and he had that smug air of someone who had never been told no. "Grace," Rachel greeted me with a polite, superficial hug. "It's been so long." "Too long," I replied evenly. Chloe, my cousin, was already seated. My mother had invited her too, of course. Finance director at a major bank, closed a multi-million-dollar deal last quarter. Just another shining example of who I should have been. But unlike the rest, Chloe had always treated me kindly. She stood and gave me a warm hug. "It's really good to see you, Grace," she said sincerely. "You look great." "You too," I smiled, meaning it. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries, passing rolls, pouring drinks, casual chatter. But the conversation predictably shifted. "So, Dad," Mark began, setting his fork down and leaning back in his chair with practiced confidence, "I wanted to let you know I've been assigned to lead the Sentinel interface integration. Alyssa personally selected me." Frank's face lit up. "That's my boy. Alyssa Grant doesn't hand out responsibilities like that easily. You must have made a real impression." Mark grinned. "She said my fresh perspective might speed things up." I stared at my plate, keeping my expression neutral. Fresh perspective, huh? I was the one overseeing the technical compliance and systems security. I would be the one approving or rejecting his deliverables. "And tell them about your team," my mother chimed in, cutting her meat with dainty precision. 12 direct reports," Mark said proudly. 2 senior engineers. They weren't too happy at first. Older guys don't like taking orders from someone my age, but they came around. "That's wonderful," Linda said, beaming. Then she turned to me. "And how is your job going?" "Still same rank." Same rank. She couldn't even bother to recall what it was. To her, it was a job, not a career. Not something worth pride. "It's going well," I replied, still choosing not to reveal anything. "Not tonight. Busy year." "Still a captain, or whatever?" Frank asked, already reaching for more mashed potatoes. "Something like that," I said, taking a bite, so I wouldn't have to speak more. "You know," Linda added with a smile toward Chloe. "Chloe just bought a beautiful new condo downtown. 3 bedrooms, incredible view of the mountains." "Oh, it's not a big deal," Chloe said modestly. "But it's good to see young people building equity, putting down roots," my mother continued. "Not just hopping from place to place every few years." I had lived in 4 different states and 2 countries over the past 8 years. It wasn't hopping, it was service. Commitment. But they would never see it that way. Frank cleared his throat. "Big day tomorrow. Alyssa's coming in person to review the project. Doesn't happen often. I've got my full presentation ready." "She already emailed me," Mark added casually. "Said she's looking forward to my proposal." "Is there anything special planned?" I asked innocently. Frank nodded. "Staff meetings, project reviews, and a special announcement about the contract. Some colonel from the Pentagon is supposed to show up, but it's probably just a major. I doubt they'd send anyone senior." I nearly smiled. I could already feel the shift beginning. "Not really a big deal," Mark scoffed. "Military types don't get the business side of things anyway. They follow checklists. Check boxes." "Mark," Chloe frowned. "That's not fair." "Oh, come on. We all know it. Military is a fallback. People who can't make it in real careers hide behind ranks." Linda nodded in agreement. "We always knew Grace was so smart. That's why it was so disappointing when she made that choice." "What exactly do you think I do?" I asked, my voice calm, not defensive. "Push paper, maybe?" Frank shrugged. "Protocol and reports. It's important work, sure. But not really challenging for someone like you. You'll never be anything there," Mark said, laughing. 10 years from now you'll still be following orders while I'm running a division. The words hit harder than they should have. I thought I'd grown past caring what they thought. But something in me still wanted them to see me, not the girl they imagined, but the woman I had become. Chloe tried to shift the mood. I think Grace made a choice that works for her. A waste is what it is, Linda sighed, shaking her head. Remember how all your teachers said you could run a company someday? The rest of dinner blurred after that. Conversations drifted to Mark's vacation plans, Rachel's promotion, Chloe's new portfolio strategy. No one asked where I had been deployed last. No one cared about the classified certifications I had recently earned. I was a ghost in their world. As dessert came, apple pie, my childhood favorite, I listened as Frank spoke again about the upcoming meeting. This contract might finally get me that VP promotion, he said, a glimmer in his eye. 28 years with Stratos. It's about time. I nodded politely, my thoughts already on the morning to come. They were so sure of their reality, so wrapped in a version of me that didn't exist anymore. Later that night, I lay on my childhood bed, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. My parents were down the hall, their voices soft but audible. I heard my name mixed with praise for Mark. She's just different, Linda was saying. Mark, though, he's exceptional. Alyssa would be smart to promote him. I closed my eyes and ran my fingers over the edge of the uniform in the closet, over the insignia stitched with earned respect. They had written me off before I even had a chance to prove myself. But tomorrow they would see. Not because I needed their approval, but because it was finally time they faced the truth. I didn't sleep much that night. The house creaked and settled in the quiet hours, the same way it had when I was a teenager, lying awake wondering if I'd made a mistake by wanting something different from what my parents envisioned. Back then, I didn't have medals or rank or combat experience to prove my worth, just belief. Belief that I didn't need to follow my father into Stratos' defense or shadow Mark's path to validation. Back then, that belief had felt fragile. But not anymore. As I lay there, memories drifted in like old ghosts. I saw myself sitting at this very dining table at 19, clutching an ROTC brochure, explaining that the scholarship would pay for college and launch a career I believed in. My father had stared at me in disbelief. The military, he said, disgust in his voice. That's for people who can't get real jobs. It is a real job, I had argued. And it's what I want. But what I wanted had never mattered. They wanted law school, business school, something shiny with titles they could brag about to neighbors. And when I didn't fit that mold, they simply erased me. My commissioning ceremony went unattended. My photo, taken in crisp uniform with my hand raised in oath, stayed buried in a drawer. Tiffany, now Chloe, had driven 6 hours to attend. My parents hadn't even sent flowers. Still, I rose. I graduated, commissioned as a second lieutenant, and pushed through every grueling rotation and training assignment with quiet determination. My aptitude in systems analysis and cybersecurity had been recognized early. I moved quickly, faster than most. By 23, I was a captain in a specialized task force focused on advanced cyber threat mitigation. At 26, I led an investigation into a foreign breach that saved hundreds of classified files and likely more than a few lives. It was after that operation that General Julia Reed first approached me. Back then, she was a colonel, sharp-eyed, relentless, and brilliant. She took one look at my incident report and called me into her office. "You think differently, Morgan," she had said, dropping my file on her desk. "That'll take you places." And it did. Under her guidance, I trusted my instincts. I uncovered vulnerabilities others missed, patterns that seemed invisible until I pointed them out. I became a strategist, not just a technician. When a routine audit exposed a multi-vector threat spread across 3 allied networks, I led the team that patched it. That mission earned me early promotion to lieutenant colonel and a place on the Pentagon's radar. When General Reed, now a brigadier general, was asked to recommend someone for the military liaison role on Project Sentinel, she said my name first. "They're developing next-gen cybersecurity systems," she told me. "We need someone who understands both ends, military precision and corporate strategy." "That's you." 3 weeks ago, in a small but high-ranking ceremony at the Pentagon, she pinned the silver eagle to my uniform. Full colonel. At 28. No one from my family was there. I didn't even tell them about the promotion. Why would I? They hadn't earned that moment. But tomorrow, they would see. They would understand that my rank wasn't just a title. It was evidence of years of grueling work, leadership under pressure, and absolute excellence. I stood from bed, quietly, and opened the closet. I pulled out the uniform and laid it across the chair like armor ready for war. Even in the soft glow of morning, the brass buttons gleamed. Each ribbon and badge told a story, a deployment, a training mission, a successful intercept, a recommendation from command. Proof of what they refused to see in me. I polished my insignia once more, double-checked for loose threads, then prepped the white shirt and black skirt that would complete the ensemble. My hair was pinned exactly to regulation, every strand in place. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, I was no longer the daughter who had been forgotten in family photos. I was Colonel Grace Morgan. Downstairs, I heard them moving around. Doors opening, suit jackets rustling, car keys jingling. They were leaving for the Stratos Defense Headquarters, each of them unaware that I would arrive through a different entrance, walk through a different door, and sit at a different table. I waited until their cars had pulled out before locking the house behind me and heading to my rental. I checked my bag again. Uniform hat, ID badge, authorization letter, Pentagon-level clearance documents. Everything was in place. The drive to Stratos took less than 15 minutes. The glass and steel facility gleamed under the bright Wyoming sun. It was a monument to innovation, military contracts, and corporate legacy, everything my father valued. Everything he had wanted for me. And now, I was in charge of protecting what he had spent decades trying to impress. I pulled into the reserve space marked Military Liaison and shut off the engine. A moment passed. I let it wash over me. The tension, the excitement, the calm before impact. Then I stepped out. Security at the gate stiffened as I approached. 2 guards glanced at my rank and stood taller. "Good morning, Colonel," one said, his voice respectful. "May I see your ID?" I handed it over. Colonel Grace Morgan, Pentagon Liaison for Project Sentinel. He scanned the card, looked up again, and nodded with wide eyes. "You're expected in the main conference room. Would you like an escort?" "No, thank you," I said. "I know the way." I did. I had studied the entire layout before arriving. The blueprints, the schedule, even the seat arrangements. Inside the building, the energy shifted. Conversations quieted. Employees in suits and dresses glanced up as I passed, first at the uniform, then at the insignia. Respect followed me like a ripple in still water. When the elevator reached the executive floor, the doors opened to reveal my brother Mark, staring at a tablet. His eyes lifted casually, expecting someone else. Then he froze. He saw the uniform, the insignia, the name tag. "Grace," he said slowly, his voice tight with disbelief. What are you doing here?" "Good morning, Mark," I replied, my tone professional. "I'm here for the project review." Before he could say another word, our father rounded the corner with 2 other executives in tow. His expression changed as quickly as Mark's. Surprise, confusion, concern. "Grace?" Frank said, startled. What is this?" "I'm just heading to the conference room to prepare," I said, nodding to the clock. "Meeting starts in 20 minutes, right?" The executives glanced between us, eyebrows raised as they noticed the matching last names. One of them, a tall woman with a legal badge reading Megan Porter, stepped forward. "Colonel," she said, recognizing the rank. "It's an honor to have you here. We didn't know you'd be attending in person." My father stared, his voice faltering. "Colonel Grace, what is this about?" I kept my tone measured. "I'm sure Ms. Grant will explain everything during the meeting." And with that, I stepped past them, leaving their questions trailing behind me. The moment they'd been waiting for, their big presentation, their moment to shine, was about to become something else entirely. The conference room buzzed with quiet energy as staff set up presentation screens, laid out folders, and arranged coffee pitchers at the long executive table. I walked to the seat labeled Military Liaison, Project Sentinel, and set down my folder, the weight of my presence already shifting the tone in the room. The young woman arranging materials nearly dropped her clipboard when she saw me. "Oh, Colonel Morgan, we weren't told you'd be here in person. Do you need anything? Extra copies? Special setup? Everything looks perfect, thank you," I replied with a polite nod. She hurried off, clearly shaken by the unexpected rank in the room. Over the next 10 minutes, various executives and department heads filtered in. Some gave me curious looks, others greeted me with a handshake and introduced themselves formally. Their deference stood in stark contrast to the dismissive tones I'd heard just hours earlier in my family's dining room. I kept my posture calm, hands folded, eyes focused on the schedule. My name sat bold on the printed itinerary, just below CEO Alyssa Grant's. I would be speaking second. I didn't need a dramatic entrance or raised voice. My credentials and authority would do the work for me. Mark and Frank entered 5 minutes before the start time. Both wore stiff expressions and avoided eye contact. They sat far from me, exchanging glances as if still unsure what exactly was happening. I made no move to approach them. I was here to do my job. At precisely 9 a.m., the main door opened and Alyssa Grant walked in. She was everything I remembered from our briefings, confident, composed, and sharp as a scalpel. Her tailored navy blazer made her appear both commanding and stylish, and her presence shifted the energy of the room immediately. Conversations hushed. Chairs straightened. Coffee cups were set down. She scanned the room quickly, then stopped when she saw me. "Colonel Morgan," she said, her voice lifting with surprise and warmth. She changed direction immediately and walked straight toward me. We were scheduled for a video conference. I stood and extended my hand. I was in town visiting family. Thought I'd stop by in person. She smiled. "Excellent initiative. Your presence will make this a far more productive meeting." She turned to the room. For those of you who may not yet be aware, Colonel Grace Morgan is the Pentagon's primary liaison for Project Sentinel. She has full oversight of all technical requirements, security protocols, and strategic integration. Final approvals pass through her. Across the room, I saw my father's mouth drop slightly open. Mark was frozen in his chair, blinking like someone had just unplugged his brain. "Colonel, we're honored to have you here today," Alyssa said as she took her seat. The meeting began with department updates. Each speaker addressed both Alyssa and me, acknowledging our equal authority. It was clear that while Alyssa ran the corporate side, I represented the military, the customer, the judge, and the ultimate decision-maker. I listened attentively, taking notes, asking questions when necessary. When cybersecurity integration came up, all eyes turned to me. I offered insights drawn from my field experience, on-the-ground deployments, live simulations, and emerging threat models. Across the room, Frank sat like a statue, barely able to process what he was hearing. Finally, Mark was called up to present. He stood with his tablet, normally smooth and poised. But today, his voice had a slight tremble. I'm presenting our proposed user interface integration model," he said. "Our team believes we've found a way to streamline visual protocols for operational deployment." He spoke faster than usual, occasionally glancing in my direction, but unable to meet my eyes. I watched him fumble a few data points, one of which contradicted a compliance requirement I had personally signed off on 2 months ago. When he finished, Alyssa nodded. "Thank you, Mark. Colonel Morgan, any questions?" I looked up, calm and direct. "Yes, a few. Could you clarify how your proposed visual sequence aligns with the biometric two-factor protocols outlined in Section 9C of the requirements?" Mark blinked. I believe we assumed those would be handled post-integration." "That would be a critical oversight," I replied evenly. "It needs to be embedded in Phase 1, or it jeopardizes the audit trail." He nodded quickly, flustered. "I can revise that." "I'd appreciate a revised spec sheet by the end of the week," I said professionally. I wasn't attacking him. I was doing my job. But the shift in the room was tangible. The people who had once likely dismissed me as someone's sister or a peripheral figure were now watching as I held Mark and the project to account. Frank sat rigidly, avoiding all eye contact, his lips pressed into a thin line. By the time the final presentations concluded, the new dynamic was crystal clear. This wasn't Frank Morgan's meeting anymore. It wasn't Mark's launchpad. It was mine. Alyssa stood and addressed the room. Colonel Morgan will remain on site through tomorrow to conduct security assessments. Please provide her with full access and any information she requests. This project is a cornerstone for both national security and our company's future. As the room cleared, Alyssa approached me again. I must say, Colonel, she said, you've exceeded my expectations. General Reed speaks very highly of you, but seeing you operate in person, it's another level. Thank you. That means a great deal. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Frank lingering awkwardly. He looked like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. Mark stood beside him, shell-shocked and pale. Alyssa turned to the remaining executives. Let's introduce Colonel Morgan to the full team. I joined her as she led me to a group of senior staffers. Everyone, this is Colonel Grace Morgan, the Pentagon liaison who has been guiding Sentinel behind the scenes. Her cybersecurity leadership shaped the core of this system. Robert Hayes, the VP of Engineering, extended his hand. Colonel, your report on quantum threat modeling was brilliant. We've already adapted some of your strategies. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand. More introductions followed, each person offering genuine respect, referencing articles I'd written, protocols I'd designed. And then Alyssa turned toward Frank. And, of course, you all know Frank Morgan, our Director of Regional Operations. Frank, I didn't know Colonel Morgan was your daughter. A thick pause. Everyone turned. Frank looked between us, finally finding his voice. Yes. Grace is my daughter. Alyssa blinked, visibly surprised. You never mentioned your daughter, was Colonel Morgan. She's been at the heart of this project. Frank struggled. I didn't know, not until today. Alyssa turned to me. Is that true? I nodded calmly. My family and I haven't really discussed my career progression. Until now. Mark stepped forward, eyes wide. You're the colonel? The one they've all been talking about. Yes, I confirmed. I've overseen Project Sentinel for 6 months now. 6 months. Frank echoed, stunned. You've been a colonel for 6 months and didn't tell us? I had my reasons, I replied. Alyssa sensed the growing tension and quickly stepped in. Colonel, since you're here, would you mind briefing the team on your role? Of course. I moved to the presentation screen, connected my drive, and pulled up the classified approved project overview. Then I turned to face the room. Project Sentinel is a $1.2 billion initiative to develop the next generation of cyber defense infrastructure. I began. My role is to ensure every line of code, every security protocol, and every integration meets Pentagon standards. All design decisions, budget approvals, and key staffing choices pass through my office. I let that sink in. Mark visibly swallowed. He knew what that meant. I continued the presentation, detailing strategic implications, compliance standards, and future evaluation metrics. When I concluded, the room broke into applause. Even Alyssa looked impressed. We are lucky to have Colonel Morgan guiding this, she said. Her authority is final. Her word is policy. Frank sat stiffly. Mark looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. For the first time, the room didn't see me as someone's daughter or sister. They saw me as what I had earned. As the meeting came to a close, the room began to empty. The air still crackled with the buzz of shifting power dynamics and revelations that could not be undone. Senior staff and department heads filtered out, each offering me parting nods or a handshake, their expressions reflecting the new understanding of who I was and the weight I carried. Only a few remained behind. Alyssa Grant, still discussing follow-ups with her legal team. Robert Hayes, deep in conversation with Megan Porter near the back of the room. And my family, my father Frank, my brother Mark, and now, to my mild surprise, my mother Linda, standing near the doorway. She must have been called after the meeting. Her posture was tense, hands clasped tightly in front of her, lips pressed in that familiar disapproving line she wore every time she had to acknowledge something she couldn't understand. Alyssa turned and called out, "Colonel Morgan, when you're ready, let me introduce you to a few other executives from the Washington office. They're eager to connect." "Thank you," I said. "I'll join you shortly." I turned toward my family. The moment had finally arrived. The conversation they had never prepared for was about to begin, and nothing would be the same afterward. My father cleared his throat. "Grace," he began, shifting awkwardly on his feet. "We should talk." "My office." "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I just need 10 minutes with the security team first. Let's meet at 11 sharp?" He nodded, the gesture more automatic than certain.
11. Yes.
Okay. The tone of his voice was unfamiliar, hesitant, unsure, not the voice of a man used to being outranked in his own domain. Mark stayed silent, standing near the window, staring at the city skyline like it might give him answers. At exactly 11 a.m., I knocked on the glass door of Frank Morgan's corner office. "Enter," he called. Inside, the scene looked like something out of a family intervention. My father stood behind his desk. My mother sat on the edge of the conference table, arms crossed but eyes flicking nervously toward me. Mark leaned against the window, his earlier smugness gone, replaced by a look of stiff discomfort. No one spoke right away. "Please," my father gestured to the guest chair across from his desk. "Sit." "Thank you," I said, but remained standing, adopting the parade rest stance, hands clasped behind my back, spine straight. My uniform remained immaculate, crisp lines and silver insignia shining under the office lights. My mother shifted uneasily. "You didn't tell us, Grace," she said. "All this time, all this rank." "I tried," I replied evenly. "I sent invitations to my promotions. I called after deployments. I emailed articles when they were cleared for publication." Frank looked confused, like someone watching memories reassemble into a different truth. "I didn't realize," he said, almost to himself. "Colonel, that's a senior rank, right?" "It's equivalent to a vice president in corporate terms," I said. "Roughly." That landed hard. My father sat down, slowly. Mark stopped pretending to look out the window. "And you're in charge of the project?" Mark asked, voice edged with disbelief. "Yes," I replied. "I've had full oversight of Project Sentinel for 6 months. Every technical decision, security protocol, and staffing assignment approved by me." Mark stiffened. "So, that's why you came back? To ambush us? Embarrass me in front of Alyssa?" I stared at him, keeping my tone neutral. "I came back because it's been 5 years. And despite everything, you're my family. The fact that the project review aligned with my visit was convenient. That's all." "But you didn't tell us," my mother repeated, her voice a brittle whisper. "You let us go on thinking." "Thinking what?" I asked calmly. "That I was a failure? That I was still a junior officer pushing paper? You never asked. Not once. Not last night. Not the past 5 years." My father stood, his face flushing with heat. "People are going to think I used influence to get you on this project." I actually laughed. "Dad, I spent my entire career avoiding any hint of favoritism. General Reed assigned me to this project based on my credentials, my track record, and my security clearance, not your name. In fact, I asked not to be assigned anywhere near Stratos for years just to avoid this exact accusation." "General Reed?" my mother asked. "My mentor," I said. "My commanding officer. The woman who believed in me when you didn't." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Mark finally spoke again. "So this whole time you were climbing ranks doing top-level work and we didn't know?" "No," I said. "You didn't care to know. That's the difference." The silence was thick now, charged with guilt, anger, and something unfamiliar, respect. "What do you want from us?" Frank asked. "An apology? Recognition?" "I want what I've always wanted," I said clearly. "Respect. Not approval. Just acknowledgement that the path I chose is value, even if it wasn't the one you wanted for me." Frank's expression wavered. Then, slowly, he stood and extended his hand. "Colonel Morgan," he said, voice low and unsteady, owe you a significant apology. I failed to recognize your achievements. I made assumptions about your career. I was wrong. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't warm, but it was genuine. I took his hand. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. My mother stood next, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for the right words. We should have come to your ceremonies, she said at last. I would have liked to see you recognize. It was the closest she would get to an apology. I nodded. Mark finally turned around. So you outrank me. By a lot. This isn't a competition, I replied. It always was, he said. At least the way Mom and Dad set it up. I just had the advantage of taking the path they understood. I tilted my head, surprised by the self-awareness. We chose different paths. Both have value. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. What I saw in that meeting today. I could never do what you do. The command, the expertise, damn. It was impressive. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. Frank cleared his throat. Alyssa wants to take us all to dinner tonight. Now that she knows we're family. She's very impressed with you, Grace. I know, I said, allowing myself a small smile. You probably know more about this company than I do at this point, he muttered with a shake of his head. Only the classified parts, I said dryly. For the first time in years, he laughed. The air in the room softened. There was still damage to heal, years of rejection to reconcile, but something had shifted. They had seen me, truly seen me, and what I carried. For now, that was enough. I have another meeting to get to, I said. But yes, I'll join you all for dinner. As I opened the door to leave, my mother called after me. Grace, I paused and looked back. I know, Mom, I said gently. One step at a time. Then I stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the version of myself they had clung to for so long, and taking with me the respect I had earned on my own terms. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Phoenix apartment, arranging place settings on the dining table. The soft amber glow of the pendant lights illuminated the space I had come to call home, a sleek 2-bedroom condo overlooking the city skyline. It was the opposite of the house I grew up in. Modern, quiet, and undeniably mine. Tonight, I was hosting my family for dinner. For the first time in years, it wasn't out of obligation. It was by choice. My father arrived first, holding a large, framed article in both hands. Thought you might want a copy, he said with a sheepish half-smile as he stepped inside. The article featured a photo of me in full uniform, standing beside General Julia Reed and Alyssa Grant at the formal launch of Project Sentinel. The headline read, Youngest Colonel in Cyber Command leads historic military tech partnership. I had it professionally mounted, he added, handing it to me. I've got one in my office. Thanks, Dad, I said, genuinely touched. I hadn't asked for validation, but the gesture meant more than I expected. My mother came in next, holding a homemade apple pie, my favorite from childhood. She still looked slightly uncertain, like she was figuring out how to exist in this new dynamic, but she smiled as she walked in. I hope I made it right, she said. It's been years since I baked one. It smells perfect, I said. We were learning how to connect again. The comparisons had stopped. She no longer brought up Mark or Chloe every few minutes. Instead, she asked questions, real ones, about my job, my schedule, even my last trip to DC. Mark and Rachel arrived shortly after, carrying a bottle of wine and a stack of small dessert plates. Nice place, Mark said, glancing around. Way nicer than our place, honestly. Thanks, I said, taking their coats. As we settled into the living room, the conversation flowed easily, remarkably so. Mark poured wine while Rachel complimented the art prints on my walls. My father examined the modest bookshelf, stopping in front of a display of military awards and certificates. He picked up one of the smaller frames, a commendation from the Joint Chiefs. I read about that cyber attack you helped stop last year, he said, turning toward me. Didn't understand all the jargon, but it sounded significant. It was, I replied. We intercepted the breach early. If it had gone unnoticed, it could have taken down major parts of the national grid. Lives were at stake? Potentially, yes. Not just military lives, civilians too. Infrastructure security isn't flashy, but it's vital. He nodded slowly, a look of respect deepening on his face. I always thought military service was all about boots on the ground. Never imagined a battlefield could exist behind a keyboard. That's why we're effective, I said with a light smile. Most enemies don't see us coming. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find General Julia Reed standing there in civilian clothes, though her posture and presence carried the same weight as her uniform. "Colonel," she greeted with a rare warm smile. "You have excellent taste in wine. I brought a bottle." "General," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, and thank you for making the time." I had invited her not just because she was in town, but because I wanted my family to meet the woman who had done what they hadn't, believed in me when it mattered most. "Everyone," I said as we entered the living room, "this is Brigadier General Julia Reed, my mentor and commanding officer. General, this is my family." My father stood quickly, extending his hand. "General Reed, it's an honor. We've heard so much about you." "Likewise," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Grace has spoken about you as well." "She's earned everything," he added, glancing at me. "More than we ever gave her credit for." My mother approached next, offering a seat and asking about dinner. For once, she didn't sound intimidated or defensive, just sincere. We all gathered around the table shortly after, passing dishes and trading stories. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. General Reed shared a few anecdotes, carefully avoiding anything classified, about life in command, operations overseas, and the emerging landscape of cyber defense. My parents listened intently. Mark even leaned in, nodding at every mention of technical innovation. "Grace," my mother corrected herself with a small laugh. "She created a simulation for training, didn't she?" "She did," Julia replied proudly. "It reduced successful breach attempts in training exercises by over 60%. It's now standard protocol in all major cyber units." My parents stared at me, astonished. "We didn't know," my mother said quietly. "All these years, we didn't know what you were really doing." "You never asked," I said, but this time without bitterness. "But now you know. That's what matters." After dinner, while the others lingered at the table, Mark helped me clear dishes in the kitchen. "You know," he said quietly, rinsing a plate, "I always thought I was ahead. Promotions, raises, big titles. And," I prompted, "and now I realize you were playing a completely different game. One I never even saw." "It was never a competition, Mark." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I made it one." I nodded, appreciating the rare honesty. "We were raised in a house that measured success in a very narrow way. That wasn't your fault. Or mine." He offered a small smile. "For what it's worth, I implemented those security suggestions you gave me. The team thought I was a genius." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you give credit where it was due?" He laughed. "Eventually, after soaking up the praise for about 5 minutes. "Progress," I said. Back in the living room, my father stood to make a toast. "To Colonel Grace Morgan," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us that leadership doesn't always look the way we expect it to. That success is about strength, vision, and integrity. We may have taken too long to see it, but we couldn't be prouder now." Everyone raised their glasses. My mother had tears in her eyes. Julia gave me a nod of acknowledgement, the kind that said, "This is your moment. You earned it." I looked around at my family and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. This wasn't about vindication anymore. It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about having chosen a path that felt right, and seeing that path validated not just by the people who led me, but even by those who had once doubted me. And that meant everything. A week after that dinner, I received a handwritten letter from my father, something I hadn't seen from him in over a decade. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, and a little shaky, as if every word had been considered twice before being committed to paper. Inside, he wrote how he had spent the past few days reflecting on everything he had missed, not just milestones, but the kind of daughter he had failed to truly know. He wrote, "I always wanted to be proud of you, Grace, but I never expected I'd have to catch up to that pride so late. You were already miles ahead." It wasn't poetic. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that mattered more than anything he could have said at the dinner table. Since that night, things with my family had changed, not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. My mother called occasionally, not just to tell me about Mark's latest update or Chloe's recent investment, but to ask how my week was going, how long I'd be stationed in Phoenix, and whether I had time to join a call with extended family. She was still awkward, still sometimes defaulted to her old habits, but she was trying. And that, more than anything, told me we were on a new road. Mark surprised me the most. After years of rivalry, whether intentional or simply bred from how we were raised, he had begun to see me not just as a sister, but as a peer. He started asking for feedback on leadership tactics and even ran a few mock presentations by me before pitching them to his team. "I need someone who won't sugarcoat it," he said once, laughing nervously. "And you've always been brutally honest." "That's the military in me," I told him. "We don't have time for fluff." We'd started texting weekly, something that never existed in our relationship before. He even invited me to join him on a panel about cybersecurity at a regional tech conference. "We could tag team it," he said. "You from the defense side, me from the user interface angle. A sibling duo." The idea made me pause, not because I didn't want to do it, but because it was the first time he'd ever suggested we work together as equals. Meanwhile, Project Sentinel was progressing faster than projected. Alyssa Grant had sent me a personal note after I returned to DC thanking me for what she called transformative leadership. She said I had brought clarity and direction to a process that had been stagnating for months, and she hoped I would consider consulting on future projects even after Sentinel wrapped up. But the most meaningful recognition still came from one place: General Julia Reed. A month after the dinner in Phoenix, she pulled me aside after a Pentagon briefing. "Your family sees you now," she said. "That's good." "I didn't think it would ever happen," I admitted. She smiled. "It rarely does. That's what makes it worth it." She paused, then added, "I've nominated you for the Defense Innovation Medal. It's early, but they're watching Sentinel closely." I stared at her, stunned. That award is usually reserved for tenured colonels and generals. "And your work rivals theirs," she said simply. "You don't just meet expectations, you redefine them." That afternoon, I sat alone in my office overlooking the Washington skyline, thinking about everything that had led me here. Every skipped family event, every lonely promotion ceremony, every email that had gone unread. And yet, I never let that stop me. For a long time, I had tried to be seen by them. I had chased their approval like it was a checkpoint on my career path. But somewhere along the way, I realized that real respect doesn't come from being understood by everyone. It comes from staying true to yourself, even when they don't get it. The irony was never lost on me. I had become exactly the kind of leader they claimed I could be, just not through the path they envisioned. One evening, I found myself walking through a museum exhibit at the National Museum of American History. It was a new wing on cybersecurity and modern defense, featuring interactive stations, artifacts from Cold War-era codebreakers, and a section on recent military innovations. Near the end of the exhibit was a photo from the Project Sentinel launch. I was in it, uniformed, focused, standing beside Alyssa and Julia. There was a small placard beside the photo. Colonel Grace Morgan, youngest full colonel in Army Cyber Command history, led the strategic implementation of Project Sentinel, a landmark military tech collaboration. I stood in front of it for several long minutes. No fanfare. No audience. Just me and the quiet recognition that I had finally become visible, not just to the world, but to myself. Back in Phoenix a few weeks later, I hosted a smaller dinner, just my parents and me. No big occasion. No formal toasts. Just conversation and laughter that didn't feel forced. My father brought another article, this one from a defense publication praising Sentinel's first-stage results. My mother brought a new recipe she had been trying. It was messy, too sweet, and she admitted she'd forgotten an ingredient. "I think I added sugar twice," she laughed. I smiled. "It's perfect." She reached over and touched my hand. I still don't understand everything you do, Grace. But I've stopped wishing you did something else. That's enough, I said softly. That night, as I walked them to the door, my father turned and said, I hope we get invited to your next ceremony. Whatever it is. I nodded. You will. And I meant it. They weren't perfect parents, and I wasn't a perfect daughter. But we had stopped pretending. And that made room for something real. Later, I sat on my balcony overlooking the Phoenix lights, glass of wine in hand, watching planes disappear into the dark sky. There was no more need to prove anything. I had done that. What lay ahead wasn't about vindication, it was about growth, choice, and peace. I had forged my own path through fire, doubt, and silence. And now, finally, I could walk it without needing anyone's permission. 3 months later, I received an official envelope from the Department of Defense. Inside was a formal letter confirming I had been awarded the Defense Innovation Medal, one of the highest recognitions for technological leadership within national security. There was also an invitation to the awards ceremony scheduled to be held at the Pentagon in late spring. I sat quietly with the letter in my lap, rereading every line. It was a moment I used to dream about, except this time, I didn't need it to prove anything to anyone. I had already earned the most difficult recognition of all, my own. Still, I knew exactly what I would do. I picked up my phone and called my father. Hey, Dad, I said. How would you and Mom feel about coming to DC next month? There was a pause. Is it for something special?
Yes.
I'm receiving a medal. I'd like you both to be there. His voice cracked just slightly. We wouldn't miss it. The ceremony was held in one of the Pentagon's formal halls, rows of polished chairs, flags from all branches of the military lining the room. My name was called near the end of the program. As I walked to the stage, I glanced at the audience. My father was seated in the front row, upright and still, his eyes not moving from me. My mother clutched her hands together, tears already forming. Mark and Rachel were there too, Chloe beside them. General Julia Reed pinned the medal to my uniform herself, just as she had done with the Silver Eagle of Colonel nearly a year earlier. But this time, something was different. This time my family watched. Afterward, photos were taken, handshakes offered, congratulations whispered with quiet respect. The press release went out the next day, naming me as the youngest recipient of the award in over a decade. When I returned to Phoenix, I found a package waiting at my door. Inside was a hand-carved plaque from my father. It read, "To Colonel Grace Morgan, who led with purpose, stood with integrity, and earned every inch of her success." I placed it on the wall above my desk, just below my framed commissioning photo, the one they had never seen before this year. Later that week, I sat down for an interview on a military podcast focused on leadership. The host asked, "Colonel Morgan, what advice would you give to someone who feels unseen by their family or undervalued in their journey?" I paused, thinking about everything that had brought me here. "Build anyway," I said. "Even if no one applauds you at first. Even if they misunderstand you. Success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. And one day, if they're lucky, they'll catch up to who you've become." The interview went viral in veteran communities. Messages poured in, young women in ROTC, soldiers in cyber units, even parents who said they now saw their children's ambitions in a new light. I responded to every message I could. A few weeks later, Alyssa Grant invited me to speak at Stratos Defense during their annual Executive Leadership Summit. This time, I wasn't a surprise guest. I was the keynote speaker. The woman who had once been dismissed as someone who followed orders and filled out checklists was now being flown in to train leaders on innovation and cross-sector collaboration. Frank attended the summit too. Afterward, he stood in the hallway with me, surrounded by professionals from both the military and corporate sectors. "You know," he said, looking around the lobby, "I used to think legacy was about titles and offices. But now I know it's about impact. What you've built. It's beyond anything I ever imagined for you. And I couldn't be prouder." "Thank you," I said, smiling. "But I think I was always building it. You just couldn't see it yet." He nodded. "You're right. And I'm glad I finally do. We had lunch that afternoon, just the two of us. No tension. No competition. Just two professionals, father and daughter, finally speaking the same language. That summer, I took a few weeks of leave and traveled. I visited Italy, explored Tokyo, and hiked parts of the Pacific Northwest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something or trying to arrive somewhere. I was already there. When I returned, a new assignment awaited, another defense partnership, this time involving allied international teams. It was complicated, classified, and high stakes. Just the kind of challenge I thrived on. Before the assignment began, I spent one last quiet weekend in my Phoenix apartment. I stood on the balcony with a journal in my hand, reflecting on how far I'd come. There were no lingering doubts. No need for their approval anymore. But it still meant something that they now offered it freely. As the sun dipped below the mountains, I thought of the girl I used to be, the one sitting alone in her childhood bedroom, listening to her family praise her brother and wonder aloud why she wasn't more like him. She had been strong. She had kept going. She had chosen a path no one else believed in. And now, she had become something unstoppable. So, what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in you? Have you ever fought to prove yourself not with anger, but with persistence? If so, I hope my story shows you that it's possible to reclaim your voice, your power, and your worth, even if it takes time. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. You don't need anyone's permission to become who you're meant to be.